Charlotte, if I may,
Yeah.
as representing Kansas Honey Producers Association, I'll give you a brief introduction. I unfortunately don't know you as well as Jolie does.
Yes.
I know you from your online presence because I receive your newsletter at about Bluebird Gardens, and I always look forward to that. You delve into beekeeping, gardening, uh, crafts, sewing, cooking, all these wonderful aspects of home life. But I have heard you speak at previously at a and so been really looking forward to today because this is my favorite subject,
Oh,
uh, planting for pollinators. So I will give you the floor. This is Charlotte Wiggins, and she's going to speak to us about planting for pollinators. So you may go ahead,
okay.
Charlotte.
Let me share
Thank
my
you.
screen. You're welcome. There we go. And I'll go to the slide, the beginning slide, primarily because I like the picture. Okay. So hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here. This is one of my favorite topics, and I have been probably engaged in gardening for 41 years on this Missouri limestone hillside, a beekeeper for 15 and teaching beekeeping for 12. And I used to work for the Forest Service. I was their public affairs director for Missouri. And it's interesting, even with all of that interest and all of that focus on the outdoors, it wasn't until I had bees, honeybees in 2010 that I started to understand the connection between what pollinators do, our food sources, and how we can help them. So when you think of pollinators, what comes to mind, right? Honeybees are the main pollinators because they pollinate 80% of the healthy food that we eat, right? The fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. But we also have other pollinators are important to this web of life and ecosystem. Native bees are more efficient pollinators, but they live a shorter period of time. And they're dependent sometimes on specific flowers. Honeybees are more generalists. Native bees tend to be more specific. So as those flowers disappear, so will the species, the native bee species. For example, the rusty patch bumblebee, which some of you may know about, used to have this huge range throughout the Midwest and now is on the endangered species list. Think about monarch butterflies. They are also being threatened right now because their foraging areas are gone. Well, monarchs depend on milkweeds from different areas of the country to guide them. So the milkweed that is native to Missouri blooms and gives them food for a certain period of time and then shuts down and pushes them down to Oklahoma so they can get to their wintering habitat in Mexico. When you're thinking about planting for pollinators, there are 4 major health challenges to honeybees and pollinators today. We have pests and related pathogens. And by the way, if you didn't think varroa were in native bees, I've seen bumblebees with deformed wing virus. So yes, those pests and pathogens do translate into native bees. We also know that those pests and pathogens are linked to poor queens. We have pesticides and their connection to making plants unhealthy and lack of plants, which is why we're discussing this tonight. So I'm going to be talking about why honeybees are starving, basically, and what we can do to provide them and other pollinators with quality food. I've got some notes here, which is the rustling sound you're hearing. Okay, so Dr. Tsuruta from University of Tennessee in 2022 had a really interesting lecture about how important it is to keep our bees healthy. And that health connection is vitally tied to the healthy plants that they visit for food for their colonies. And even before you have bees eclosing, nutrition is one of the most important elements that you need to have in your apiary. And if you don't know what's happening to your plants in your apiary or around your area, the environmental plant growing conditions affect plant nutrition levels. So we need to understand, we don't have to be master gardeners, but we have to understand the connection between the food sources for bees and pollinators and what they're getting, what we're able to provide to them. They want, for obviously, pollen, which is high amino acid brood food, right? It's 11 key amino acids that bees need to collect. We as humans, by the way, need 31. Those are the protein building blocks. And then nectars are the carbohydrates, which are energy, right? For the foragers to be able to bring in that food, that pollen. Now, when we think about keeping bees healthy from a beekeeper's perspective, we know that starvation is a leading cause of winter losses. We know that a shortage of food changes colony dynamics, what jobs the bees have, and lack of food and parasites like varroa play off of each other. So in other words, it's all connected. No one plant provides bees with all of the nutritions they need. There's no one plant that provides all of the amino acids that they need. And so the bees have to go looking for those amino acids through a variety of plants. Remember, they're competing with other pollinators. They may find a patch of flowers, but the other pollinators may have been there and taken the nectar from there, or the pollen. Not all plants produce nectar and pollen. So there's this very complicated formula that bees have to navigate. And even if the conditions are good, they share a trait with us, right? They don't necessarily eat what's and choose what's healthy for them to eat. So when people ask me how bees are doing, I tell them they're starving. I believe that the continuous loss of foraging areas is what is challenging, one of our main challenges for our bees to be healthy. We can all argue why, right? We have large monoculture fields to provide more food for our tables. We have flowerless landscapes because it's easier to run cattle on fields that don't have any flowers. We certainly have overzealous weed control. We'll talk about weeds here in a second. We're destroying native plant communities. These are the very unique communities that only exist in certain parts of the country. And when they're gone, we can't bring them back. Missouri, for example, has 34 very unique native plant communities that are now that land management agencies are trying to protect. But we don't have just one field of yellow sweet clover, and that's going to help our bees with their health. They need a variety of food, just like we need a variety of food. And obviously the lack of meadows and cover crops is also impacting their ability to find the variety of foods that they need. Pesticides, lots of discussion about what that means. I will tell you from my perspective, pesticides poison the soil because, frankly, they're often overused. We don't read directions, and those chemicals that are produced in the pesticides, we then mix them with insecticides, we mix them with herbicides. We don't read the instructions, the labels. So it's just easier for me to say to you, stay away from them, unless you can find the time to adequately research and know how to use those products. So basically, for bees and pollinators, the lack of year-round food sources is the basic challenge. Now, when I do lectures for people in this community, one of the things that always seems to resonate with them is that the bottom line is honey is flower nectar. A lot of people don't know that. And it takes 2 million flowers, which the bees dehydrate to 18% to make that 1 pound of honey. Sometimes it takes something that simple to help people understand why they need to plant more flowers, shrubs, and trees, because that's a lot of nectar that has to be collected. And if you think about how much bees need for winter food, that's a lot of flowers. So let's talk about basic honeybee nutrition, right? Bees need more than pollen. They need both pollen and nectar. Not all plants produce both. Not all nectar and pollen are the same, nor do they all provide bees with all their vitamins. Plants themselves have flower shapes, colors, scents, yes, electrical charges, even petal markers that we as humans can't see that draw the bees and other pollinators to plants. And in exchange, the pollinators help plants survive by moving pollen from one plant to the next so plants can reproduce. I like to think of bees as nature's matchmakers. Plants produce nectar, which is the honeybee's reward for their pollination services. The nectar is a sweet substance, is a sugar with amino acids and minerals, right? Calcium, potassium, magnesium, and copper. Plants and bees, in other words, regardless of what we think or what we know about the separate bees, pollinators, plants, they are themselves interdependent. So we're talking about nectar. Nectar varies from plant to plant. As we know, as beekeepers, it varies in color, in sweetness, when it's provided, and how much is provided. Some plants will only give a little teeny tiny amount of nectar to entice the pollinator. Other plants will provide more, sometimes driven by other factors. But the nectar is not a spigot of nectar that's the same. Studies show that hygienic behavior increases with nectar flow. So nectar also contributes to colony health. We know nectar is bee fuel, right, for flight, to make wax, to keep warm in winter, which is why beekeepers, we feed our bees sometimes sugar syrup to simulate plant nectar, right? In nature, that nectar, as I said, is not one strength. It can vary from 5% to 75%. Now, the ideal ratio in research studies is that pollinators and bees in particular like that ratio around 20 to 25%, which makes sense to me. I also feed hummingbirds. And if you think about hummingbird food, it's 1 part sugar and 4 parts water. In terms of what bees need for their food going into winter, it averages between 50 and 80 pounds of nectar dehydrated into honey. Of course, if it's a mild winter, they need more. If it's a harsher winter, they need less, which is kind of contrary to how we think about providing our bees with food. Now, pollen is their main protein source, which is consumed by the nurse bees, who then use their hyphalangeal glands to produce the royal jelly that helps to feed the colony. It has fats, minerals, sterols, and micronutrients. In terms of pollen for an average colony here in the Midwest, they need between 50 and 100 pounds of pollen a season. The interesting part about pollen is that plant protein levels, just like with nectar, vary. And the critical thing about pollen is that quality of pollen is more important than quantity. So if you're having low brood rearing, there's a chance that one of the causes is low quality pollen. Now, you probably have one of these lists. Friends are always sending me these lists. You know, what can you plant to help for pollinators? These are sometimes fun to look at. They can be helpful, but they focus on the wrong end of the solution. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's all in how the plants actually grow. The highest quality pollen comes from plants growing in the healthiest of soils. Our nectar flow on the average here in Missouri is 3 months long, although this year it's been closer to 5 months because it started earlier. You know, with climate change, our rapidly changing climate, we're having longer springs, longer falls. Our nectar flow here started in March instead of May. But knowing what's going to happen is important. We just don't have a lot of control over that. Why? Because look at all these things that impact our plants. Plants don't produce nectar, and if they produce pollen until after 74, 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And they get stressed when the temperatures start heading north of 86 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll talk to master gardeners and they'll talk about the 86-degree Fahrenheit point as very significant for whether a plant will continue producing nectar and pollen or will shut down and to go into survival mode. So for example, if you've planted buckwheat early in spring, and that happens, we have some beekeepers around here who like buckwheat as a cover crop and as food for their bees. They'll often tell me at our club meetings, hey, I haven't seen any bees on the buckwheat. Well, that's because the plant itself doesn't have the right temperature, right? It's not hit 74 degrees yet to say, okay, it's time to produce nectar. And buckwheat, by the way, I call it bee coffee because they tend to produce nectar in the morning, but shut it off about 10 o'clock, right? So they don't produce nectar all year round. So as the best advice I can give you in terms of your concept of planting, just like we tell you about planting, managing your colonies, is to keep your soil healthy. Now, I had a lady tell me last week, she said, oh, don't tell me about getting a soil test. That sounds really complicated. So here's a picture of a soil test. If you don't know what kind of soil you have, get yourself a soil test. Your local extension office can do that for you. You get 6 to 8 scoops of soil, you put it in a bag, put your name on it. I didn't get a soil test here. I got one last year. It's $15 for the test. Can take 2 to 4 weeks to come in. Tell them what you want to plant. If you want blueberries or you're planting native trees or whatever it is you're planting, and they will tell you not only what kind of soil you have, but how to amend your soil to be able to plant what you're planning to plant. I do my soil test every other year because it helps me adjust what I'm doing. I don't try to adjust my soil. I try to adjust my planting to the kind of soil I have. And if you haven't thought about soil, soil's fascinating. It's kind of like our skin, right? Our skin is our largest organ. Well, soil's also part of this web of life that's very, very important. It's 45% minerals, 25% air, 25% water, and 5% organic matter. There is such an intricate network underground that we don't realize that 1 teaspoon of soil has more microorganisms in it than people currently living on Earth. There's everything from mycelium and mushrooms that have communication networks between trees down to little micro nematodes and organisms that live depending on the temperature that the soil is. Some of them will live from one range of temperature. They are triggered by temperature, they die off, and then another microorganism fills in. So again, this is intricate web, right, that's going on. This is why people tell you don't till anymore, because if you're tilling, you are destroying this network. Now, in general, plants take in sun, right? And through photosynthesis, turn sunlight into sugars. Those sugars move through plant roots, right? And feed microorganisms in the soil, which in turn provide the plants nutrients. When the soil is healthy, it doesn't need artificial nutrients and fertilizers, right? Because of the soil itself is healthy and can fend off diseases. That should sound a little familiar when we're to you, because we talk about that with Varroa as well. Soil is not the bag that you go get at the local garden center, right? It is a non-renewable resource. I'm sitting on a limestone hillside, and my main gardening tools are 2 pickaxes, right? Because I'm always having to find a hole or make a hole on my hillside, make room for some of the plantings that I do. But in general, you cannot recover damaged soil within a lifespan. It takes 200 to 400 years to really help recover soil. And it takes a very long time to develop brand new soil. So you hear sometimes ad council messages on television about be kind to your soil, don't let it run off, make sure your stormwater is not spreading your soil around. That's because we cannot make more soil in our lifetimes. We need to be careful and be good to the current soils that we have. Now, I've mentioned cover crops like buckwheat earlier. You can use cover crops as a soil enhancer as well as to provide bee food. Some cover crops and some plants reserve nitrogen, which is what helps plants grow. Others return nitrogen to the soil. Some can also provide pollen and nectar, but not all of them provide both. So it's important when you think about all of the things that can go into, right, planting, focus on something that you can make a difference. And that's the problem solvers of your soil. So for example, if you are new to an area and you don't have anything on your soil, don't plant grass, right? Do your cover crops, make sure your soil is planted. It's whatever you're planting is holding the soil down so it doesn't wash off during storm waters. And it's having something that's conditioning the soil while you're waiting to decide what you want to do with a particular area. If you're going to, this is a very popular hobby right now, having home gardens. Don't go and fertilize a plot of soil and then plant it next week, right? You need to let the compost that you add to soil, or the manure that you're putting on your soil, the fertilizer, it needs to wait 6 months, right? It needs to incorporate itself into the soil, have rainwater help incorporate it. You don't want to be tilling it, but you want to let that natural mixing occur between the soil and whatever you think you need to add to the soil, which is why a soil test is really important. You will then know what to do and you'll be saving money because you'll be doing what your soil needs. If for those of you who have Japanese beetles and small hive beetles, I would recommend you look at nematodes. They're tiny worms that you can buy and spread through your soil, and they will destroy the grubs, right? Moles go after grubs in the soil. So the nematodes will naturally get rid of grubs. So you'll get rid of the Japanese beetle grubs, right? The ones that will come out next year, your small hive beetle grubs, as well as help your soil stay healthy because you won't have moles going through. Mulch is another tool to use. You mulch after a frost and you mulch after a rain, because what you're trying to do is prevent your soil from heaving and shrinking. If you've been looking at your soil during the drought that we've been having, your soil literally goes down to nothing. You have there are engineers that talk about house foundations that crack because the soil disappears, right, from protecting the foundations on homes. So mulch is an important tool to have. You can get them from recycling centers. You can get it from sawmills. Again, if you're using it where it's been just cut, you want to let it sit for a while so it doesn't burn the area that you're wanting to plant. If you want to get rid of plants, go ahead and put your mulch on that. But these are tools you need to think about so that you can help keep your soil healthy. And then, of course, my favorite, something we all can do, is compost. We throw away 40% of the food that we have. And composting is how we get that 5% organic matter I talked about back into your soil. Now, if you have a freezer, I joke about the little basket that you can pull out in your freezer. That's your composting bin, right? You can put a plastic bag in there and throw your kitchen scraps in there. And when that bag is full, you can take it outside, dig a hole in a flower bed or around a tree, bury those kitchen scraps in there and let the soil pick that up. Once you start doing that, because composting is just like exercising, it's a habit you have to develop. You can then graduate to something a little bigger. I think the little composting pot on the left is from Gardener's Supply. My brothers gave me that. But I also use the coffee can on the right. I take that to our club meetings and I collect coffee grounds and whatever else people are throwing out, because you can easily compost whatever you're collecting. And don't let anybody tell you it's complicated. It is not. As you get more compost, you get in the habit of doing that. You might graduate to a 55-gallon container that has holes in the bottom, and you start throwing things in there with maybe some grass clippings and some dried leaves. You want half brown and half green is what they talk about. And frankly, I just keep throwing things into composters. I have 7 of them. I like the one on the left more than the one on the right because it has a handle so I can easily turn it. You want to be able to aerate, right? Add oxygen to the compost to help the stuff that you have in there decompose, and you need to put water in it. But you will after you start composting and you see all of this stuff decompose into this beautiful black soil that you can then put on your flower beds and around what you're wanting to grow, I think you will get hooked on it because you are actually recycling those kitchen scraps that before you were throwing into landfills, and you're making good use of those in your soil. Okay, now you know what kind of soil you have, and you need to plant the right kind of plants for that soil. Not all plants will grow in all soils. And you can start out by going to your local garden centers, local master gardener meetings, maybe your native plant nurseries if you have them. Most of those places will grow plants that are appropriate for your growing zone. So when you pick up something, maybe at a garden center, it has a tag, read the tag. There's a lot of information on that tag before you buy. Make sure that the soil they describe is what you have. Make sure that you can provide the watering conditions, the light conditions, and that will increase your chances of being successful. You also don't want to buy the lovely plants that already have flowers at the top. Okay, I'm a big, plant rescue in the cart that has the plants that they're at the end of their lives, because frankly, some of those plants are going to be better than buying the ones that already have flowers. They're spending a lot of energy to produce flowers, but if they're just focusing on producing the greenery and growing, you have a better chance of transplanting that than you have the more fancy plant. Now, what do I mean in terms of growing conditions? So USDA has plant hardiness zones, right? They're the average coldest temperatures in a particular region. They were last updated in 2012. They are showing that we are getting warmer, as I said, longer springs, longer falls. I've been moved from the USDA zone 5 to 6A, but I still, you'll see at the bottom, the average annual extreme minimum temperatures. I still buy plants as if I'm in zone 5, because remember, these are averages. So we may still have winters that will dip into lower temperatures than the average. So I don't plant for the 6A zone. I plant for the colder zone so that the plants have a better chance of surviving. Now, some growers are also now adding the plant heat zones, right? Missouri and northern Kansas now in is heat zone 8, which means that these plants can survive over 86 Fahrenheit for 60 to 90 days. And some plants that can do that, you may already know this, are black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers, New England asters. They have a wide range across the country, and they've acclimated themselves to be able to make it through these hotter temperatures. So let's say you're planning to add bees to your garden. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is to scope out potential hive locations. That means places with the best food sources with an easy bee reach, right? When I hear people talk about 2-mile radius, up to 5-mile radius, you need to somehow make a circle around where you're trying to locate hives to make sure your bees have a food source. In general, start with 1 hive per acre. And the more food sources you have, the more you can push that with more colonies. But you don't want to cause your bees to rob from each other because they're competing for resources. So how do you do that? Well, you have to identify trees, shrubs, and plants that you have. And I know some people don't know what they are. And you have to identify invasives as well as your natives. So start doing an assessment of your property, if that's where you want to put your bees, or wherever your potential apiary location is. And I say to people, don't think of it as a piece of land that nothing's growing on. Embrace what's already growing. I'm on a 1 acre limestone hillside with a 40-degree incline, and I have a ton of eastern redbuds blooming. And so I've just decided to embrace them and stake them so they grow a little straighter. And in the springtime, I'm in a pink haze that my bees love, because these are native trees to not only most of the northern US, but also to my garden. And if you don't know what a plant or shrub or even some little insect that may be in your garden, try iNaturalist.org. It's a free kind of citizen science site. A lot of people can help each other in identification. If you want something that you spend money on, there are a lot of plant apps that you can buy. Picture This is one that several of our beekeepers in our Rolla Bee Club like to use. But I tend to use the Missouri Botanical Garden Plant Finder. Of course, I can identify some plants without any help, but if I'm not sure, the Missouri Botanical Garden Plant Finder is excellent for identifying Midwest plants, and that's also free. Okay, so you want to know what your hardiness zone is. Maybe you're new to this, and so you know that you can plant when things are warm, but you don't know when your first frost date is or when your last frost date is. You have issues with drought. We all seem to be having issues with drought this year. And you want to know what kind of plants might be appropriate for your particular soil type. Plantmaps.com, an excellent free website. You can put in your zip code to get your hardiness zone. They have first and last frost dates, again by zip code. Again, great resource to help you get the information so that you can make a determination of what you want to do and when you want to do something. Now, getting back to that little list of plants for bees, frankly, your biggest bang for the buck for your bees is going to be planting native trees. Okay. The trees already have a relationship with the climate, with the soil types, with the native pollinators that may be in that area, and they can provide the biggest food source for the pollinators, right? Trees can provide a lot of nectar, a lot of pollen in one structure. And if you think about it, out in California, about the same time that we have trees starting to produce nectar and pollen in the Midwest, the almond trees, right, are providing those visiting pollinating bees with pollen, about 29% crude protein, one of the highest levels of protein that bees can get. And that's why when they come back to their home and they get packed up into packages to sell to beekeepers, the providers will say they've been well fed because they've had good protein source out east. So put aside those cute little wildflower seed packets and those lists and focus on planting native planting native trees. Now, here's an example of some very popular common trees in the Midwest that would cover both Kansas and Missouri and when they tend to bloom. You think about when the bees need the nectar and the pollen, right, is when they're increasing their numbers. And so if you can plant these trees and have them succession, right, succeeding each other, you will have a constant source of food through the nectar flow, right, through the summer when the plants, the trees, the shrubs go into survival mode. And so yes, it will take a few years for some of these to grow, depending on your soil conditions. I have a flowering dogwood that took 25 years to grow more than 3 feet tall because he was sitting on top of a limestone hill point that I didn't know about. And then about 26 years, he grew to 4 feet and then 5 feet. Now Theodore is 15 feet tall, like a normal dogwood tree, but it took him a while for his little roots to get through the fissures on the hillside. So just because somebody tells you, well, maple tree will take you 2 years, it depends on the growing conditions, which is why you want to place your bees in a place that already has food and then grow food for them in the future. Okay, I meant plants vary in growing conditions. Let's talk about seeds, for example. You get those pollinator seed packets that are very popular. Those are fun to get. Some of the seeds that are in those packets need to be exposed to cold or maybe warmth. For example, purple coneflowers need to have exposure to cold weather for the seeds to germinate. If you're using Scotch pine as a fence on your property, they need to be exposed to fire before their seed pods will open. You have plants that grow for 1 year, annuals like marigolds. And then if they're growing in the right conditions, all of a sudden the second year and third year, you look down there and you go, I didn't plant those marigolds there. That's because there were conditions there where they could reseed themselves. They were protected and they could regrow. You have plants that will bloom every other year. They're the biennials, right? The hollyhocks and the mullein, right? They're both native plants and the more domesticated plants that don't necessarily bloom every year. And then the ones that we all want are the ones that are once established, the perennials bloom every year. But that doesn't happen magically overnight. I talk about the first year that you plant them. They spend that first year rooting, right? They spend growing the roots. That's why they tell you to cut off the berries on strawberries the first year you plant them, or take off the flowers of a plant that you bought that it was already blooming, because you want all of their energy concentrated in their roots. For the second year, once the roots are established, then they grow, right? The plant starts developing and growing. And then the third year is when they fruit, which is blooming. But it can take 5 years versus 3. So what I'm saying is this doesn't happen overnight. It's a longer term planning process if you're adding plants to your apiary. And patience is key there. Now, pollinators favorite different flower shapes and colors. This is a fascinating field that I'll just mention in passing because people will ask me, what kind of flowers do bees like, honeybees? Well, they do see a wider color range than we do. They go into the purple ultraviolet section, but in general, blues, yellows, and white are favorites of honeybees. Butterflies like the reds, pinks, and oranges. If you look at hummingbirds, they tend to be attracted to the same thing, the butterflies, the reds, pinks, violets, and then bumbles, my gosh, they will go anywhere. So if you want to have bumblebees in your yard, just plant a cottage garden and you'll attract the bumblebees. So in terms of food sources that come from plants, I'm going to talk about the 6 main bee food plant family. So to help you organize what plants provide food for bees, because not all plants do. Asters are the ones that are daisy shaped and have single petals. You've got some zinnias here. The butterfly is on a dianthus. They are good in terms of protein for bees. They are very common. If you think of zinnias as the easiest plant to grow for beginning gardeners, to some of the more complicated hybrid kinds of plants like cosmos. I love chicory. People call it a weed. It's actually a herb, a cousin to dandelions. And if you didn't know that, if you collect a chicory root and roast it and make coffee out of it, it tastes like chocolate. So this is a big plant family that if you put in asters into your Google search, they'll come up with a series of flowers to help you familiarize yourself about your options in this particular plant family. The second one is figwort. This is a plant family that has been just recently reorganized, but I like to think of butterfly bush, which is in the photo, mullein, which is the very soft native plant that the Native Americans used for diapers and used for medicinal purposes. Basically think tiny, tiny flowers. And the bees can access those with their short tongue. The third one is legumes, right? This is when you're thinking about nuts and vegetables family: alfalfa, clover, beans, lentils, soybean. White clover has 24 to 30% crude protein. Soybean grains has the highest. But again, these are things that you can incorporate in your garden to help your soil and will also help your bees. The fourth one, oh, we missed one, is mint, right? So 8,000 species, we're talking about spearmint, catnip, bee balm. These are plants that have the square stems, right? Hollow square stems. And you can tell when these mints are blooming, because you'll see both bumblebees and honeybees all over the teeny tiny flowers. And here, when we get springtime, there's always a debate about whether henbit or dead nettle is better for bees. Both of them will help provide some food to bees at a time when there's not much else out there blooming. Mustard, think greens. This is the cabbage group, right? This is the kale group. Broccoli, horseradish. In terms of flowers, it's stock, which is an annual flower. And the important part about this is to know is, if you're a gardener, you're told you don't want your plants to go to seed, but as a beekeeper, you do want the broccoli to go to seed. You want the broccoli to produce flowers, because that's where the bees get their food, right from the flowers. And then the last one is rosa. This is anything with berry, right? Strawberry, elderberry, blueberry. These are the kinds of plants that have significant fruits to them, and their flowers are very good sources for bee food. Now, here's some principles that we don't always think about in terms of planting, right? Bees have what's called floral fidelity. They will find a food source. They'll go back to the hive. They will communicate the location. Their sisters will come out, and they will clear out that one spot of food from those plants, compared to bumblebees that'll just jump around and go to any plant, which is why in planting for bees, honeybees, we talk about planting in clumps, right? At least 4 feet wide, so the bees can work that whole clump. And if you want bumblebees, you plant a cottage garden where you have a mix of plants. You want more flowers and you want less grass. There are some native grasses that help your soil, but I'm talking about turf grass. Turf grass offers no redeeming value to your garden, to your soil, or to your bees. And there's been research now through the University of Minnesota where they actually now have cover crops and cover seed mixtures that provide very low growing plants that have flowers that are going to feed your pollinators and not overtake your area. In general, you want 26 different plant varieties blooming at the same time. That's why I just tell people, just keep planting. That's a lot of plants blooming at the same time, whether it's trees, shrubs, or regular flowers, right? Remember, bees visit 2 million blossoms to make that 1 pound of honey. I also see a lot of people doing gardens, right? The raised bed gardens where they have lovely rectangle beds and they've got their vegetables all in a row. You're missing the point of having flowers and pollinators working with your vegetables if you're separating them. You want to mix flowers with your vegetables because those flowers attract the pollinators. You want to provide water for pollinators, whether it's a shallow dish for butterflies, or it's a bird bath with rocks in them so the honeybees can land and carry water back to their hives. You want the water sources to be within, I've heard everything from 1/4 mile to half mile of your hives. And you also want to provide seeding areas for yourself. You're developing this piece of property, and you're planting things. Don't forget to have a place where you can sit down, rest, and take in the work that you've done and make notes about what you want to do next or what you need to change because it's not working. So this is one of the vegetable raised beds I had several years ago. You notice that I have native pink phlox growing at the front. On the edges of the raised bed, I had marigolds on one side, I had basil on the other side. And obviously I was keeping the bird bath full of water for my bees. If you start doing that in the springtime, your bees will learn to go to that bird bath for the water and stay out of your neighbor's swimming pool. So that's a really good strategy to use with your bees. Once your bees, I mentioned the seating areas. This is a seating area I have. Actually, I'm facing west, so I can watch sunsets as well. These are surprise lilies, which are blooming this time of year, and they're great fun to watch because the bumblebees adore surprise lilies. So they're always popping in and out. And I get a sense for that middle C the bumblebee wings make when they're moving from flower to flower. So don't forget your planting areas. Although we do have good pollen sources from annuals and perennials, unwanted plants like, quote, weeds provide a good pollen source. Dandelions we think of as weeds, but they're actually an herb. And in the 1800s, people would tear up their grass to plant dandelions because dandelions were a source of medicine for them. So if you have dandelions on your property, just leave them. The dandelions are also going to be able to help you condition your soil. Now, let's say you don't have something that you want, right? You can do a lot of things with that besides putting a chemical on those plants. You can pull them. You can pour boiling water on them. You can plant stronger native plants that will push out the plants you don't want. You can smother them with cardboard and newspaper. You can pour vinegar on them, although I don't recommend that unless it's in a very specific space. And you can eat them because most of the things that we call weeds are herbs and they're edible. One other thing that you can do is compatible planting. You've heard of three sisters, right? When you plant the corn, the beans grow up the corn, the squash helps shade the roots of both the beans and the corn. You can plant onions around roses. Roses are edible. You can plant onions around roses and they will work together. You can plant basil around tomatoes. If you have something served on your dinner table as a companion dish, you can plant those together. And basil sitting with tomatoes will improve the taste of your tomatoes, and the tomatoes will improve the taste of your basil. So basil is a great deterrent for bugs that you have in your garden. So plant your basil around some of your vegetable patches. If you have unwanted bugs, pick them off yourself. For example, the Japanese beetles that sometimes take over areas with edible plants. You know, you can put a coffee can full of dishwashing liquid and water and early morning go out and tap the plant that has the Japanese beetles on them, fall into the water and drown. You don't want them to get into the ground and pulpate for next year. You know, if you don't like doing that, put gloves on first. You know, after a while, it won't even matter whether you have gloves on or not. Attract other good bugs. Now, remember, we tend to think of gardens as we want them perfect, right? Nature doesn't want perfection. Nature wants balance. So if you want ladybugs in your garden, guess what? You're going to have aphids because aphids are the food that feed the ladybugs. So you need to learn to say, okay, I do have aphids now. There's my opportunity to get some ladybugs into the garden instead of thinking that you have to have everything all right. Now, I know this is a lot. This is just a sneak peek at a very, very deep discussion. But here's a resource that you can download for free. I'm not a Prairie Moon Nursery advocate or sponsor, but I have used this for many years in my classes because their guide, this Native Gardener's Guide, is wonderful guide on how to plant bare root plants, how to stratify seeds, what kind of seed mixes for different soil types. They have great pictures, and it is for the Midwest. And so if you want to start somewhere, you could go online to the Prairie Moon Nursery website and download their Native Gardener's Companion. I have to mention that I also have a book that includes a chapter for planting for pollinators and bees. This is a book that started using in my classes 10 years ago as a handout. It then went to a loose leaf binder and now is actually a 310-page large type book that has a whole chapter on native bees and planting for bees for people who are starting to keep bees and who don't have access to clubs and to other information. It's part of a 3-book reference series. I've written the first 2 on the left. Having a bee club that's going to help support you is very critical for your success as well. And Bee Club Basics is based on 12 nonprofits that I've developed over my life. And the latest one is actually a club that runs our bee club here in town. And then I'm working on Bees Need Flowers, which is a guide to plant for pollinators. I think we have a couple of minutes and we just have one question. So I'm going to give you a quick tour of what a 41-year-old hillside garden looks like without grass. I have people who say to me, yeah, okay, well, I can't imagine that looks pretty or is attractive, and maybe you don't find this attractive, but this is a sneak peek at my garden. You're now coming down the hillside, down those steps to the front entrance. I collect stormwater, water runoff into these little ponds. The bottom pond has goldfish to keep the water level and then balance, and then the little pond on the left is actually called the frog nursery. And so you can see that there's a bit of a drop from where the road, Bluebird Lane is, and where the garden is.
I can't see anything except
Yeah,
we're not
Oh, the screen sharing.
I'm
is
sorry,
off.
Charlotte. Yeah, we're seeing
seeing
the,
it. We're
you're
just
planting
seeing
for
you're
pollinator
planning for
screen.
pollinators.
Okay, it says there your screen sharing is paused. So let me. Okay, I may not be able to do that. So let me just stop so I can handle questions. Anyway, I was going to show you just an example of but you get a sense from some of the pictures I think I shared with you. Okay, add basswood and black locust. They are not invasive. No, they aren't, Jolie's, but they're excellent bee food trees. And sorry, you couldn't see the garden, but there were some pictures that you hopefully saw earlier that got you a sense of the garden. I have no grass, and my garden is a 1 acre full of paths. And if a plant's growing in the middle of the path, guess what? I don't go move that plant. I just move the path. Either I go around it. If the plant's decided that that's where it's happy, it gets to stay there. I just don't try to. It's not a formal garden, right? It's informal garden. It's a certified wildlife habitat. It's a monarch way station. It's a working apiary. And it's where my neighbor said 41 years ago, nothing would grow. And I can tell you it is a challenge, but I think it's worth the effort, because I see all of the pollinators I have here on the backside, on the west side here. In another month or so, I'll be able to sit out on my little deck here and watch monarch butterflies migrating south, because they come through. They stop in my garden for the milkweed and they go south. Okay, well, Rob says we want to try again. All right, let's see if I can do that. Okay, can you see it now? It's coming up. But if you go to YouTube and look for me, Charlotte Wiggins, I have a little YouTube channel that has some videos that I use for presentations like this. So this is actually posted on YouTube. You'll get to see it's a 3-minute tour of the garden, so that you get a sense for, what a garden without grass can look like. And remember, the paths look narrow, but they were bigger when I first started, 25, 30 years ago. And the plants themselves have encroached and grown. And so, as I said, I just leave them the way they are. I don't mess with them. So this is actually the southern apiary in my garden. And I do share my adventures in what I'm doing in the garden at a blog called gardeningscharlotte.com. I also have a blog on beekeeping, which is called homesweetbees.com. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to give me a call or follow up with an email. So let's see. Okay, I like to purchase late spring plants at a bargain price. Me too. I repot them into larger pots and wait for fall. In the fall, I then place them into flower beds or the landscape. Perfect, because you're giving them that growing season for the roots to grow and get established. And you're going to have a better success rate of planting them in the fall going into winter. I've been told by the county that milkweed is considered invasive and should be removed. He said he isn't enforcing it, but some counties may be. Makes me sad. Well, you need to ask him what kind of milkweed. We have 36 different species in Missouri, And tropical milkweed can be considered invasive. You don't want to be planting the tropical milkweed. You want to be planting the native species. So I'd be kind of curious to know what species he says is invasive. Where did I get my data that takes thousands of years to build or rebuild soil? Yeah, from the Soil Water Conservation Service. If you copy, open your own screen after. Okay. Do you use a greenhouse? No, but I have a dining room and living room that gets full of plants in the wintertime. And I have a porch area that's 10 by 33 feet we finished that this spring, that my tropical fruit trees and some of my flowers come in and winter over in. And I love having my house full of plants in the middle of winter. It makes me feel better about cold weather. I wasn't raised in the US. I was raised on the Tropic of Capricorn, right in the middle. My idea of winter was putting on a sweater. So I had to learn when we moved back to the States about winter and gloves and cold weather. And it can really make me sad if we have extended cold periods. So I love having the plants surrounding me and making me feel like spring is just around the corner. And I do have a greenhouse that is in a storage shed because I do want to put it up here once my contractor finishes up on a house that he's working on. Okay, I think I covered all the questions. Let me just real quickly go back. Yeah, and thank you. I'm not quite sure why the YouTube video wasn't working. It worked last week, so but do take a look at that. That'll give you a sense for what, and you can see from this picture here that they're paths, no grass. I love monkey grass to line the paths so I can help maintain them, because sometimes things get covered up and I don't always remember where the paths are. But go with natives. It'll be the easiest thing that you can plant, the most successful that the most success that you will have, and the best thing that you can do for your pollinators. Thank you very much for coming. Ooh, yes.
Charlotte, we really want to thank you for this. Sorry, we all had trouble getting in. I don't know.
So
I had to Zoom and all kinds of stuff. So.
I'm glad you were able to join us. She says, I'm excited to rethink my areas for plants and trees. Yes, that's exactly what you should be doing. Don't make more work for yourself. Embrace what's there and then build on that. That's what I did here. So Jolie, is Chip around?
Chip.
Yeah.
Oh.
You said I might meet the new dog?
Come here. Chip. So we have a new dog and I wanted to name him Ellis. I should name him Chip. And
oh, he's got the lovely collar on.
Yeah, and I name after, so he's got the cone on. Can you guys?
Hi, Chip.
He's Chip.
Probably a little spooked, right? There's a lot of going on.
And cute. He is cute. He's really a good dog. But anyway.
How's he getting along with the other dogs?
He just has another day of his cone and he'll be.
Oh,
he
good.
gets along really well with Remy, but he and Quinby don't get along so well. So Quinby keeps stepping on him, and then they have a big fight because Quinby's blind. So,
right.
Anyway,
Oh,
they'll work it out of it.
Yeah, they will. New mascot. Right.
So, any suggestions for? Yeah.
Any suggestions?
Any suggestions for future programs? Anyone? For future programs? Joe and I were together for 11 hours today, but we did.
That's what she said. She
discussed
said,
this.
Shame on us. 5 o'clock this morning. My word. That's a long day.
Yes. Well, all right. If there's nothing else,
Bye.
Thank you, Charlotte. Great job. I really enjoyed it.
Good.
Bye.
I'm glad. Thank you. Take care. Bye.